What's up, folks? I got a fun one for you today. If I was to ask you what you would be willing to pay for a GameCube Mini, what would your answer be? Now, what if that question was a GameCube Mini where you can add the entirety of the GameCube library instead of what Nintendo includes in there, as well as the entire Nintendo 64 library, the Super Nintendo library, Game Boy Advance, NES, Game Boy Color, Game Boy, etc. And actually, we don't need to move backwards. What if this GameCube Mini could also run the Wii? Probably even a Wii U, maybe even a Nintendo Switch, the entirety of the Xbox and PlayStation libraries up until the 360 PS3 generation, and then of course, every single title that's available on PC, whether it's on the Windows Store, Steam, the Epic Store, anything really. I know it seems like a very obvious question, but sometimes you do have to break it down for people that are very intimidated by the PC ecosystem. So I myself am not really new to the concept of emulation, obviously. But in recent years, most of my tinkering has been done on my actual consoles. I tend to really enjoy buying stuff that I can homebrew. The last new console that I purchased was the Xbox Series X, and it was primarily because I set it up to be a massive emulation device. But it was a bit of a tedious process, although honestly not as hard as you'd think. Regardless, the Xbox Series X was a $500 console at the time, and it's a lot more expensive now. The Series S is a good alternative, although you're not going to get as strong as an output, and even then, a brand new Series S at the prices that they are, unless you're going to get one used for around $200 and it's in very good condition, I probably still wouldn't recommend that. And a large reason why I say that is because now, even in comparison to 5 or 6 years ago, the ability to have an all-in-one gaming device has dramatically improved. But the issue is that it's improved to the point where it might be intimidating to figure out what your needs are and what the budget should be in order for you to achieve those needs. And obviously, I don't have the answers for you specifically for your circumstances. But I have gone on quite a bit of a journey over the past few months to the point where I've landed on something that I feel pretty good about. Now, as most of these conversations tend to go, the discussion always begins with the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck, in my opinion, is probably the easiest, no-brainer decision anybody could make, with realistically the best bang for your buck option to enter into the gaming PC world. And if you guys don't mind, I'm going to be approaching this as somebody that's a Nintendo fan and not as a PC gamer, because obviously I'm Nintending. Or maybe for this video, you can call me Steam. On the Steam Deck, you obviously have access to the entirety of the Steam library. Every single indie game and third-party title that you wanted to play on your Nintendo Switch is pretty much available, obviously, to purchase on there, and usually they're at a much cheaper price. For some of the higher-end games that have released on the Switch 2, you might not be able to get as good of an experience as you would on the Switch 2, but for others, you might actually get a better experience. Either way, I would honestly not recommend high-end third-party titles for either of these devices unless it was your only gaming device. But the point is, there's definitely a comparable experience, and it's really up to the end user at the end of the day to do the kind of research to figure out what their priority is. In the case of the Steam Deck, you have access to the entirety of the Steam library, which means most cross-platform third-party titles are going to be available for you. But the games that are optimized for the Nintendo Switch 2, potentially, depending on how much effort the publisher wants to put into the console, could run much better on the Switch 2 than it does on the Steam Deck. So it's kind of a numbers game, but also a bit of a coin flip. But again, I'm a Nintendo fan and I'm speaking to Nintendo fans. So obviously you have to think about what you're sacrificing here. And obviously the biggest thing that you would be letting go of are the first-party Nintendo Switch 2 titles. Currently, if you're thinking about the exclusives, it's not that big of a pool. Switch 1 games don't always translate perfectly one-to-one with the Steam Deck, so even games that came out on both generations like Pokemon and the upcoming Metroid, you can't always guarantee the Switch 1 version is going to run well on the Steam Deck, but more often than not, if you give it a little bit of time, somebody's going to make it work pretty well. But as far as the actual exclusive titles, we're talking Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Kirby Air Riders, Hyrule. Those obviously, at this current moment in time, have no way of being played anywhere else outside of the Switch 2. Now, once again, this is largely going to depend on the type of gamer that you are. I'm somebody that doesn't necessarily have to play a game as soon as it comes out, and it's largely because I don't have that much time to do so, but also because I like to play games at my leisure. For massive multiplayer games, I realize that might be a little bit more difficult, since you kind of want to get in while things are hot. So once again, this would be a factor that you yourself has to prioritize. For me, online gaming is not usually with randos. I'm usually playing with friends and family, and as such, it doesn't really mean too much to me to make sure I buy, I don't know, the next Splatoon game whenever that comes out. But obviously, if you're somebody that has to get in on the hype when a multiplayer game game first drops, that's something you would be sacrificing if you walked away from the Switch 2. Now, I won't focus too much on the prices because, well, I've talked about nothing but prices for 6 months pretty much. But within the range of what you can get for the price of a Switch 2, you can find devices that might fit your needs better and give you that Nintendo experience that you would otherwise get on a Nintendo device, with obviously the consideration of those sacrifices that I previously mentioned. As I kind of alluded to earlier, emulation for pretty much every single console you want up until the Nintendo Switch is available on even the more weaker of these handheld gaming PCs. We can do the whole song and dance here where we pretend that you're gonna rip all your ROMs off, but it's very easy to find full-on packages that include entire libraries of pretty much every single console up until the Nintendo 64, and then you can kind of pick and choose once you get to the GameCube and Wii era what you want to download. This of course is with the assumption that you've already purchased the title, because I don't condone this behavior. But the nice thing about this is the liberty to be able to pick and choose what you want to play from the classic libraries, instead of frequently sitting there and scratching your head wondering if this is going to be the month where Nintendo finally puts Donkey Kong 64 on Nintendo Switch Online. Not to mention you get like random third-party games that probably will never show up on Nintendo Switch Online. Like imagine if you were a fan of arcade sports titles like Wayne Gretzky 3D Hockey, or GameCube it would have been NHL Hits, the NBA Jam franchise, or any other third party from a completely different genre. Or even like think about how long it took for GoldenEye to make it to the Nintendo Switch Online app. All of that wonder, that waiting, just kind of goes out the window. And really the only downside I can think of is that it's just not easily as accessible as just getting a Nintendo Switch Online with a Switch. But something like SteamDeck has made it so easy for just the average person to jump into the world of emulation on any of their PCs really. To the point where I think the tutorial is almost a formality. If you just download the program and get started and you know where to get ROMs from, you're already more than 75% of the way there and can even start some of your gaming experiences, and then you can jump into like the hints online once you want to tweak things, if you would like to tweak things. And then obviously the nice thing about something like the SteamDeck is the fact that it runs SteamOS, so it doesn't feel like you're jumping into something that's as complicated as a PC. It just feels like a regular old handheld console for a regular console gamer. But hidden between all of the cracks is all of the benefits that you would get with a PC. Now in the case of the SteamDeck, this is for a handheld experience. Obviously, in the past few days, we've heard about Valve releasing the Steam Machine, or the GameCube, as many are calling it. This could potentially take everything that I just spoke about and streamline it even more so for people that are looking for a couch TV gaming experience, with a device that more or less will fully blur the lines between a console and a PC. Basically, I think it'll do exactly what the SteamDeck did for handheld gaming, but for the home console world. However, there is something that people need to realize, is that these devices are not really for everyone. And even in the PC world, obviously they're not for everyone. So just because Valve announces a Steam Machine, it doesn't mean you should expect that PC enthusiasts all around the world are going to be rushing to buy a Steam Machine. I actually think it's the opposite. So like me, for example, I'm not going to buy one because I don't need one. I have a desktop with an HDMI that runs straight to my TV, so I would have effectively no use for a Steam Machine. But that doesn't mean that I don't see the value or the benefit of a Steam Machine. See, it's a bit complicated to explain to most folks, but many people look at the sales numbers of the Steam Deck, for example, and they laugh it off because they try and compare it to the number of sales a console makes. But that's not quite how it works, because you have to consider all of the different ways somebody could play Steam games, which basically means every single PC that somebody has. And then you have to consider all of the different ways they can play those games portably. So they can either stream their home desktop onto a separate device, they could have a laptop that they take with them everywhere they go to play these games, and obviously they can buy every branded handheld gaming PC and access that library. And even in addition to that, they have the added thought where they might not want anything portable, so they just have their PC and they play their PC games on their desktop. The point is that there are just so many different ways for these people to access their library that it's hard to actually quantify just how many people are enjoying the Steam environment, or even just PC gaming in general. Whereas with consoles, it's a lot more straightforward. You know that if everybody wants to play Nintendo Switch, they have to buy a Switch. Or more so with the Switch 2, because obviously the Switch 1 is jailbroken and there are emulators. But officially, you have to buy a Nintendo product to play Nintendo games. And it's more or less the same thing with Xbox and PlayStation, although obviously there's a lot more synergy these days. But in the case of Sony, you're not exactly accessing that PlayStation store outside of your PlayStation console. So it's not really a one-to-one comparison. It would almost be like comparing all of the sales of a MacBook Pro to like how many sales one specific Dell laptop makes, and then drawing a conclusion that there are more Apple users out there than Windows users strictly by comparing the sales of that one specific Dell laptop to all of the MacBook owners. But all of this is to say that even though the Steam Machine I think is a very good device potentially, it doesn't mean I necessarily expect it to sell that well, and that's primarily because there are just so many other routes that people can take into getting into this environment. But most importantly, I think this will be a very good introductory device to people that are trying to get into the PC space, but they might be a bit nervous going into it. Especially for people that are looking for a PC gaming experience on the couch in their living room that's just very seamless and easy to introduce to your family. Crucially, however, I think the price is a very important thing to keep an eye on. At the time of recording, I don't think anybody's put a price on it yet. There are estimates floating around that go anywhere between $400 to $600. I really think they should push this thing to as low as a price point as possible. Because if the purpose of this device is actually to reach the casual gamers in the living rooms and hoping that they would jump on the Steam environment, you're going to easily scare most of them away with a high price point. And especially if they're trying to capture console gamers specifically, pricing it at the same price of a PlayStation 5 will scare many people away immediately. They'd be like, why would I buy that? I can just get the expensive PlayStation 5. I think we kind of saw something similar with the Steam Deck. Now with the Steam Deck, they actually did subsidize the cost of it a lot, and they brought it down to $450. And to be fair with the Steam Deck, I think it was a lot more experimental. It was much more getting people that were actually on their PCs to have something to play on the go. I don't think they were necessarily trying to go after the casual crowd as much. But I know for most people, when they saw that the Steam Deck was coming out and they had a Switch that could only cost $300 and you could actually get the Switch Lite for like $200, a Steam Deck at $450 for the average customer that's just looking for a gaming handheld is scary. It makes people think twice about whether or not they should purchase something, because $450 for the average customer is an expensive price. Now, honestly, I don't know what they should be pricing the Steam Machine at. I know that with the Switch 2 being at $450, that completely changes the game now because there is effectively nothing budget out there anymore. Or at least budget in comparison to the average customer's expectations when they go to the store. And that's another thing, Steam stuff are not sold in stores anyway. But I think how aggressively they decide to price the Steam Machine is going to determine a lot of how easily it'll be recommended for various people. Now, obviously, Valve might not need to sell a lot of these. They might not want to sell a lot of these. They might be approaching it the same way they approach the Steam Deck, where it's like, if you want one, they're available on our website, and you're buying it directly from us, and we're not sending out to retailers, and they're not really pushing advertisement all that much. That might be the route that they want to take, and they'll just let the word of mouth and the online discourse do the talking, and that'll get things going. But if they do decide to market it a little bit more aggressively, if they do decide to actually sell this thing in stores, then I don't think the price discussion can be ignored. If you're going in there and you're trying to win over console gamers, this needs to be budget friendly, and the costs needs to be subsidized. Something I really don't like, and it's a conversation that I've seen surface much more over the past 6 months than I ever noticed before, is that with pretty much every failed console, or console launch even, in the past 20 years, we've seen a very clear pattern where the jump up from the previous version to the newer version is a pretty hefty price jump. But I've noticed something online, and I don't know if this is intentional marketing from the corporations, but they've convinced people that the price point has nothing to do with it. And you'll always see these discussions come up. They'll say, oh, it wasn't the price, it was because they didn't have a strong launch lineup. Oh, it wasn't the price, it was because they didn't market it well. I don't know why people are so quick to push away the price points. It doesn't make sense to me. While yes, a poor launch lineup and poor marketing will have an effect on things, the giant leaps of price from the previous gen console to the new gen console also psychologically mess with the average customer. We saw how big the leap from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3 was. We saw how big the leap in price from the DS to the 3DS was. Even considering the Wii to the Wii U, that was a $100 difference. The headlines picked that up pretty quickly. And even with the Switch 2, we still have yet to see the effects of the holidays and the next year going forward. We're still very much in enthusiast territory. But just based off of the discourse online, most people that are complaining about anything Nintendo related right now, the discussion is specifically about prices. And obviously it's because the console went from $300 to $450. This shakes up users' perspectives of what they expect to pay when they come to buy these things. And the Steam Machine, if they're going into that console market, will be no different. Because as much as you or I want to try to explain to people that it's not a console, it's a PC, so it makes sense to us that a budget PC should be more expensive than a premium console, For the average console gamer, they will not connect those dots. And I say this as somebody that's been an average console gamer my whole life and has been surrounded by average console gamers. So yeah, all of this is to say is that I think the Steam Machine is an excellent device. It's going to be a very good thing to introduce to living rooms. And if they can make the price point right, I don't know what that price point is that's right, but obviously the lower they can go, the better. I think you can really see the discussion start to shift. And the same way the Steam Deck introduced us to a whole plethora, an ocean of new handheld gaming PCs at pretty much every level that you would like one at. The Steam Machine could potentially be that first device that brings it into a very seamless experience in the living room. And that might lead to an Asus PC home console experience, a Lenovo one, etc. But if the Steam Machine is priced too high, I just don't know how much the appeal is going to be there, because most people that are willing to spend that much on these things will probably already have some kind of easy way to dock their handheld gaming PC, or they're able to connect their desktops to their TVs. I guess we'll see. Now, I've spoken quite a bit about a Steam Deck. I actually have not bought a Steam Deck, but I've only recently actually jumped into the PC ecosystem. A few months ago, I decided to buy a high-end PC, and that was largely for this YouTube channel. My editing was being done on a 12 to 13-year-old crap top, so it was time for me to get serious. And then obviously, I future-proofed myself. I spent more money than I expected to spend, but obviously it completely increased my productivity, and since I had something strong now, I'm able to game on it as well. I quickly noticed myself pretty much dumping the entirety of my Nintendo library onto my desktop. Everything from NES to Switch. And then, like I mentioned before, I started adding every emulator that I could possibly emulate on here as well. I'm still kind of in the process of tweaking a few things here or there, but it's been pretty easy. And like I said, you know, between RetroArch and EmuDeck, there are just so many good channels out there that'll show you how to do this and get into it pretty quickly. And you won't even have to adjust the controls, you won't have to adjust settings all that much. You can do that as you please, but it won't be required. And honestly, I was content with just using the PC, and I would have my Switch for on-the-go gaming. But you know, I bought Sonic Crossworlds on this PC. There are other games that I play pretty frequently with friends and family. Rocket League's a big one. So I started playing that on my PC. And I found that going back to my Switch, I really started to feel the downgrade on there. And then I started to buy some indie games and some random 4 to 8 player fun party games on the PC off my Steam library. So while I could double purchase them on my Switch, I obviously didn't, because I'm like, oh, most game nights are at my house. But what ended up happening was, in one of the game nights that we did recently, we ended up going to my cousin's house. And when I got there, all I had was my Switch and the library that I already filled up on there. Now, there are a lot of games on there, but there were many other games that were on my PC that we would have wanted to play, and we just kind of felt like we had already done all the Switch games that we wanted to do. So, for example, 2 games that we emulate quite frequently because they're really fun, obviously. The Wii version of NBA Jam and Power Stone 2 on Dreamcast. To my knowledge, I can't play that on the go with my Switch, although I think there is a Power Stone compilation that might have came out recently, but I haven't bought it. I don't feel a need to buy it. So basically, when that game night happened, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, I've gotten so accustomed to being able to have my console gaming home and on the go that I felt it was probably in my interest to buy something handheld and a little bit more portable. So naturally, my brain went straight to the Steam Deck. The Steam Decks are great. All the models for the Steam Deck are great, but again, you're buying a PC, you're not buying a console. So like with Nintendo, I know that if I want to buy a Nintendo, I buy the Nintendo console. Buying a handheld gaming PC is a lot like buying a laptop. You start to lay out all of the different price points to figure out how to get the best bang for your buck for your needs. I had my eyes on the ROG Ally X, not the Xbox version, the one that came out last year. I got pretty close to pulling the trigger on that, but I wanted to see what the Xbox Ally X came priced at, and I saw it was $1,000. I got to use one of those things. It was one of the most comfortable things I ever held in my hand, but I just could not justify the price based off of everything that I was reading online. It was like a step up, but not quite enough of a step up. I also got to see Legion Go 2. I don't say this lightly, that might be one of the slickest and sickest machines I've ever seen with my own eyes. The screen on there is phenomenal. And I think at some point in the future, I will own one of those, but it will not be brand new for $1,350. I just cannot justify that kind of expenditure. But I love the fact that it had the taller screen. It was more immersive. And since that Legion Go 2 appealed to me so much, that got me into looking at the Legion Go's with the Z1 Extreme chip. I went back and forth a bit between the new one with the Steam OS running on it and the original Legion Go that came out a couple years ago. And the two reasons why I decided to go with the older version is because I actually wanted something that ran Windows, primarily because I like to kind of go through the journey on my own. I'll start with Windows and I'll build it up and then slowly add more things. Like I already have it launching with the Steam full screen experience. I know it's only a matter of time until I consolidate everything. I also kind of want to see how the Windows Xbox full screen experience goes once that is cleaned up a bit. But outside of the whole Windows thing, I was also very intrigued by the detachable Joy-Cons just because I've gotten so used to that with the Switch. And even more so because I knew I would be emulating so many retro games, the taller screen makes a very big difference. That 4:3 ratio just fills up the screen so well that it's hard to play emulators on anything else handheld anymore. And not just that, the awkward resolution also makes this probably the best thing to play Game Boy Advance on, which wasn't exactly what I expected. And obviously, in addition to all of the emulators I put on there, I have access to the games that I've been playing on my desktop, including Sonic Racing Cross Worlds and Rocket League running much better than anything else handheld that I've ever played it on, which of course is only the Switch. Although what's funny is I think the Switch 2 also just runs the Switch version. It might be at a slightly better frame rate, so I wonder if they plan on updating that the way that they updated Fortnite. But the point is that now with the Legion Go, with very little tinkering so far, I've only put in a little bit of effort. I'm planning on getting a lot more time into this thing. I haven't really had it for too long anyway, but I kind of finally feel like I've landed on a spot where I'm pretty content. And it's honestly put me in a position where I don't know that I'll need to add anything else to my gaming library anytime soon. There could potentially be a PlayStation 5 or a Switch 2 that I could find for dirt cheap in a year or two from now from somebody used because I'm like, oh, there's a specific exclusive that I haven't played yet. But I don't know that I have any interest in spending the money for a new console right now because, again, I'm not the type of person that has to play brand new games when they're first released. And given what I've just put on my desktop and Legion Go, I don't feel like I really need anything else to keep me busy for now. But obviously there's always exceptions, so if a game comes out and really piques my interest, like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, I can always buy it on Steam. I got my eyes on that new Digimon game that everybody was talking about. I might pick that up soon. But there are also so many games that I haven't played because I've been intertwined with the Nintendo world for so long that I might just work my way backwards, find some of these games at a crazy good discount, and go from there. Or, you know, I'll just play old Nintendo 64 games and make retrospectives on those. The sky's the limit. But yeah, as the joke goes, Nintendo made me switch to a handheld gaming PC. I think most people just say Nintendo made me switch to a PC. And as the other saying goes, dude, just buy a Steam Deck. And I completely get it. I think for far too long, console gamers have been stuck with this idea where they have to stick with a specific ecosystem in order to be able to enjoy gaming. And just here's the reality. I'll say this as a Nintendo fan. There are actually games out there that are as good or better than Nintendo titles. And most of the best Nintendo games came out beyond 5 to 10 years ago. So I completely understand the online sentiment about just switching to PC gaming, because I feel like I am more fulfilled as a Nintendo fan with a PC than I ever was with the Switch, and probably ever will be if I get a Switch 2. And that's like without even discussing all of the extra benefits, without having to worry about getting a specific controller that only works for this device. I haven't had to buy any controllers. I'm using an old work USB powered dock to get my games running on my TV, and it has a hub on there so I can connect everything on there USB wise that I need. I'm not stuck paying for online subscriptions. It just feels like this whole experience has been very liberating. But I actually just realized I didn't even mention the price yet or talk about that. But you can find these Legion Go's online for anywhere between like $500 to $700 new, depending on if you are able to get it at a deal. I wanted the best bang for my buck. I'm a big supporter of buying things used and pre-owned. Just make sure your purchases are protected. I ended up getting one on eBay for $400 after tax and shipping and everything. And it's in very good condition. It came actually much better than I expected it to. That was unfortunately for the 512 gigabyte model, however, but there is an SD card slot, and it's not like a proprietary SD card. You can just get a regular one that has a terabyte on there if you need to. I haven't bought one yet, but I'm pretty sure when I do, I'm just going to throw all my ROMs on there, and I'm going to leave the internal memory for the modern games. But yeah, like I said, there's flexibility here. I can also just get a hard drive and plug it into the USB-C port and use it when it's docked. And all of this, and I haven't even talked about like the trackpad that's on this thing that makes it much easier to scroll through menus. I haven't talked about the fact that you can remove the little Joy-Con and it becomes a mouse. You know, I don't really use these features, but they're there for people that are into that sort of thing. In any case, I kind of just wanted to share my experience with you all. I know there are many of you that are on the fence about wanting to get a Switch 2, potentially switching to Steam Deck, potentially jumping into the handheld gaming market, but you don't really know where to go as far as PCs are concerned. I'd say look into the Black Friday deals. Right now, I think specifically in Canada, there are some very good deals for all of the Lenovo Legion Go's with a Z1 Extreme chip. If you happen to live in the States and you're in a bordering state, you might even be able to just cross the border and go pick one up from a nearby Best Buy. Otherwise, yeah, like I said, you can always jump into the used market online and see if you can find a good deal on something there. But anyway, that's all I really got for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you guys on the next one.